The night the ship landed, the sky above Ashfield burned with a strange violet hue, painting the clouds in streaks of color no one had ever seen before. People stopped whatever they were doing, staring upward as the eerie light bathed the quiet town. Windows rattled, streetlights flickered, and a low hum resonated through the air, vibrating through the bones of anyone standing outside. It was not a sound that came from this world. When the vessel finally touched the ground, it did so with unnatural silence, leaving no crater, no scorch marks, only a faint ripple across the grass. At first, it looked like a human figure stepping out, tall, thin, almost fragile in appearance. But something about its posture made the air grow heavy. Its movements were smooth, deliberate, almost too precise, and it seemed to glide rather than walk. The first person to see it was Emily Harris, a teenager leaning out of her bedroom window. She froze, gripping the frame as her heart hammered in her chest. The figure turned slowly, tilting its head in a way no human neck should. Its eyes caught the dim light of the street, reflecting an unnatural silver glow that seemed to pierce her very thoughts. A chill ran down her spine. Sheriff Mason was the next to arrive, drawn by the calls from panicked neighbors. His flashlight cut through the purple haze, illuminating the figure standing in the middle of Main Street. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "Step away! You're going to get hurt!" But the being didn't flinch. Its gaze locked onto him, not with malice, but with a strange, unsettling curiosity. Mason felt his legs tremble, as though the figure's stare weighed on him like a physical force. Other townspeople began to gather, whispering to one another, phones in hand but unable to capture more than a flicker of silver light. Dogs barked and then whimpered, birds shrieked and flew in erratic patterns, yet the being remained completely still. It raised a hand slowly, almost like a greeting, but the motion felt wrong. Mechanical, precise, and devoid of warmth. The air grew thick, suffocating, as if the town itself held its breath, waiting for something to happen. No one dared approach. Every instinct screamed that this was not human, and yet it resembled one just enough to trigger an impossible sense of recognition. It was the uncanny in its purest form, a thing that shouldn't exist but did, standing in the middle of Ashfield, silent, observing. And in that moment the town realized a terrifying truth. They were not alone, and whatever had arrived was something beyond comprehension. By morning, Ashfield had transformed from a sleepy town into a hive of chaos and curiosity. Scientists in white lab coats swarmed the streets alongside armed military personnel, their equipment clattering against sidewalks and vehicles. Drones buzzed overhead, capturing every angle of the silent figure that remained at the edge of the forest, just beyond the flickering streetlights. Cameras, thermal scanners, and electromagnetic sensors all failed to produce anything that made sense. The being's presence defied every law of biology and physics known to humanity. Dr. Elaine Cross, a renowned xenobiologist, crouched beside a portable scanner, her brow furrowed in disbelief. "Nothing matches," she muttered, flipping through a tablet of genetic codes. "It's not human, not any known animal, not even synthetic. Its DNA is alien." Around her, colleagues murmured, their excitement tempered by an edge of fear. Each step closer to the being seemed to make the air itself heavier, the forest shadows stretching unnaturally, as if the trees themselves were watching. The being didn't move unless it wanted to, yet its presence influenced everything nearby. Birds froze mid-flight, their wings suspended as if time had paused. Dogs whimpered and refused to approach. Electronic devices malfunctioned. Radios emitted static, phones died without explanation, and cameras displayed nothing but flickering light. It was as if the entity could manipulate the environment with sheer will, bending perception to suit its needs. Despite the anomalies, Dr. Cross was fascinated. She approached cautiously, keeping a safe distance, and whispered into her recorder, "It's observing us, but not aggressively. It's studying patterns, reactions, maybe even emotions." Her team recorded every detail, but each second brought new unease. The being's metallic-like skin shimmered in the sunlight, reflecting distorted images of the surrounding town. And though it remained silent, its gaze felt like a message, probing the minds of anyone nearby. By midday, news crews had arrived, their cameras pointing toward the edge of the woods where the figure waited. Residents peeked from behind barricaded doors and windows, terrified to confront it directly. Sheriff Mason kept a perimeter, warning people to stay calm, but even he could not hide the trembling in his voice. There was no denying it, this was not just an alien visitor. It was something far more complex, something capable of influencing human thought and emotion without a single word. For the first time, Dr. Cross whispered aloud to herself, her voice trembling, "It's not just studying us. It's understanding us. And that terrifies me more than anything else." Evening fell over Ashfield, and the town was cloaked in a tense, unnatural stillness. Shadows stretched long across empty streets, and the once familiar sounds of crickets and rustling leaves were strangely absent. Residents huddled inside their homes, windows shuttered and doors locked, whispering nervously about the figure that remained at the forest's edge. No one dared to step outside, and yet, from the tree line, the being watched with a patience that unnerved everyone. It was a child, little Tommy Harris, who broke the fragile barrier of fear. Chasing a stray dog that had slipped past a barricade, he wandered too close to the entity's perimeter. His small footsteps were muffled against the grass, but the being noticed immediately. It tilted its head, observing him with the same precise, silver-eyed scrutiny that had frozen adults in place days before. Tommy stopped, sensing eyes on him that were not merely seeing but probing, reaching inside his mind. The child let out a high-pitched scream, but it wasn't just a scream. It was a sudden eruption of terror from somewhere deep in his consciousness. Witnesses said it sounded as though the world itself had shrieked with him. Parents rushed to the edge, hearts pounding, only to see the boy staring blankly, trembling violently, while the figure remained calm, kneeling slightly as if curious, almost gentle. Then came the visions. What Tommy described later would make even the most seasoned psychologist question reality. Endless floating landscapes, twisted geometries that bent physics, faceless people screaming silently, and impossible light that seemed to bend toward him. Sheriff Mason was first to step forward, hand raised, trying to soothe the situation. "Hey, easy, you're scaring him. He's just a kid," he shouted, voice cracking. But the being's gaze fell on him, and Mason staggered back as if a sudden weight pressed on his chest. Every nerve in his body screamed, his thoughts twisted into fear he hadn't felt since childhood. It wasn't a threat in the traditional sense, it was a mental weight, an invisible force that amplified the darkest corners of one's mind. People realized that this entity was no ordinary visitor. It didn't need weapons. It didn't need to speak. It could dominate the mind itself. Panic spread faster than anyone could manage, and the town's fragile order collapsed. Families barricaded themselves, radios blared warnings, and helicopters hovered overhead, but the being remained at the edge of the forest, silent, watching, and learning. Dr. Elaine Cross knelt at the perimeter, recording every tremor, every whispered scream. Her voice was tight as she muttered, "It doesn't just see us, it sees into us. It knows what terrifies us, and it's using it." In that moment, the town understood an unbearable truth. Survival wasn't about confrontation. It was about understanding the incomprehensible, and hope was the only weapon they had left. Days passed, and Ashfield teetered on the edge of panic. The town had become a fortress of fear, every street watched, every movement scrutinized. Yet the being remained at the edge of the forest, silent, unyielding, almost patient in its observation. Dr. Elaine Cross pored over the data collected, DNA samples, electromagnetic readings, and behavioral analyses, and the truth she uncovered was more terrifying than anyone had imagined. "This isn't from another planet," she whispered to herself, staring at a screen that showed a lattice of genetic anomalies. "It's human-made, a creation, an experiment that escaped decades ago. It was meant to be controlled, and now it's evolved beyond us." Her colleagues looked at her in disbelief, but the evidence was irrefutable. This being had learned to mimic humanity, to observe and manipulate emotions, to shape fear itself as a survival mechanism. The town faced a decision that night: confront it, risk destruction, or attempt communication. Sheriff Mason stood at the barricade, the weight of leadership heavy on his shoulders. "We can't just sit here," he said, voice taut. "If it moves beyond Ashfield, we're done. But attacking it, that could make things worse." He looked at Dr. Cross, eyes pleading. "Can we reason with it?" Elaine shook her head. "Not in the way we understand, but it might respond to trust, a gesture of understanding." The plan was simple yet dangerous. They would approach cautiously, offering no threat, no weapons, only signs of surrender and willingness to coexist. As the team moved closer, the being remained still, silver eyes tracking every step. Its skin shimmered under the moonlight, reflecting not just their images, but an uncanny distortion, as if the very fabric of reality bent around it. When they were just a few yards away, the being knelt slightly, extending a long, delicate hand. There was no malice, no aggression, only curiosity, and perhaps something more, a plea. The town held its collective breath, hearts pounding. Sheriff Mason stepped forward, lowering his weapon, and for the first time, their fear was met with something unquantifiable. The being's hand hovered just above the ground, and then, slowly, it touched Mason's outstretched hand. A wave of relief, tinged with awe, washed through the humans. They felt an understanding, fragile but real, passing between them. It wasn't human, yet it had chosen to reach out. Ashfield would never be the same. The entity had arrived as a nightmare, but in that silent, impossible moment, it offered the first glimmer of hope that even the most terrifying unknown might seek connection, and perhaps humanity's greatest fear could become its greatest ally.